All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to NASPO's first ever Green Purchasing Technical Assistance Fund Roundup webinar. And after the webinar, I encourage you to try to say that 5 times fast and see if you can do it, because I could not. It's kind of wordy, but we're very excited to have you on with us today. Each year, NASPO offers funds to assist states in outreach to promote agency use of state green contracts, educational and training purposes on green purchasing, solicitation development for environmentally preferable products, and more. NASPO seeks to leverage the purchasing power of state government to conserve energy and national resources, limit environmental pollution and waste, improve public health, encourage clean technologies, and create cost-saving opportunities in a balanced economy. During this presentation today, we will hear from purchasing professionals in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Colorado on how the Green Purchasing Technical Assistance Fund has aided their state in a unique sustainability project. The contents of this presentation can aid those who have no environmental purchasing program to those that have implemented complex sustainable benchmarks. There is a question and answer tab featured at the bottom of this webinar that allows you to type questions in real time during the webinar. If you will, type your question in that tab and we will address it as soon as there is a break in the presentation. So, with all that being said, I would like to give the spotlight to John Chapman. He's a statewide purchasing manager in Colorado. John?
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks, everybody. So, hi, I'm John Chapman. I am the statewide purchasing manager for the state of Colorado. I'm trying to control my screen and it's not working. Kevin, I'm having an issue making the slides go forward.
Okay, just one moment, John. Let me see if I can.
Everybody.
John, try it now.
Nope.
All right. Please excuse us, everybody. Okay, give it a shot, John.
You can tell I have control, but it's not letting me move forward. I can just cue you on when I'd like you to change the slide.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that for right now, John.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. All right, let's go to the next slide. There we go. Sorry, as I said, John Chapman, I'm the state purchasing manager here in the state of Colorado. One of the main things that I do here in Colorado is I lead the team that manages our statewide price agreements, and I have been lucky enough to have been tasked with leading some of the Colorado's green purchasing efforts. I don't have a background in sustainability. Like Kevin mentioned, we're going to see a pretty broad breadth of where states are in terms of their sustainability efforts. And here in Colorado, I would say we're a little further behind than a lot of other states when it comes to green purchasing. But luckily, we've been able to utilize the Green Purchasing Technical Assistance Funds to really try to help us make progress in our goals. So let's go to the next slide. There we go. So we'll talk just a little bit about the Colorado procurement model because that'll help provide some context on the projects that we've been doing. Colorado has kind of a hybrid, decentralized type of model where our office, the State Purchasing and Contracts Office, we set regulations and we set policies and we set up the statewide price agreements. but we don't do any of the buying. All of the individual state agencies, they're the ones who do all of their own procurement. And we have no dedicated staff in our office or any of the other state agencies' offices who are dedicated sustainable procurement professionals. So you'll see we're the ones kind of tasked with some of these, sustainable purchasing policies, but we're not actually doing any of the buying, which is kind of an important note. So let's go to the next slide. There we go. So in 2015, our governor signed an executive order regarding the greening of state government. And it set a lot of goals around sustainability generally, energy, water management. One of the biggest things that it did was it established a group called the Greening Government Leadership Council, perfect for government to have a nice, cumbersome acronym, kind of like GPTAF, right? So the Greening Government Leadership Council, it's representatives from across all state agencies, all different job classifications. Again, nobody who's primarily dedicated to sustainability, but all people whose job functions kind of touch in that world. That governor's executive order sets out one single specific goal for sustainable procurement. That's it, just the one. And it focuses on the increased spending of recycled white paper, right? So sustainable purchasing, obviously not a huge focus of that executive order. Next slide. But that Greening Government Leadership Council decided, hey, there does need to be some additional green purchasing goals and directives. So over the last few years, they've developed some, and that's really been the area where we've used our NASPO green purchasing assistance funds. So recently, what we've been doing is the goals that we've been set out for us would be to identify some of our baseline green purchasing metrics. Where are we at right now, right? How much money are we spending on green products in our top commodity categories? That's office supplies, janitorial, and facilities MRO. And then they wanted us to develop some quantifiable green purchasing goals and metrics based on that baseline data. And because our office, we don't have any expertise in green purchasing, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources to be doing all of this on our own. That's where the Green Purchasing Technical Assistance Funds really came into play for us. Next slide. So we used our funds in 2017 to bring in the Responsible Purchasing Network. We had them help review our current agreements and all the available data in those three highest volume categories that I mentioned before: office supplies, facilities MRO, and janitorial. And at first we thought, it's just going to be, data analysis. We're going to send them some of the information that we had, fairly straightforward, just something that we didn't really have the time to do. And this turned out to be a much, much bigger effort than we first imagined. Our only real source of data was vendor-provided sales reports. Some vendors provided it with great detail. Others provided no detail at all. Some vendors didn't provide anything, period. We didn't have any kind of data from them. And nobody used the same reporting format. So it made it very difficult to make comparisons across vendors. And because all of this data was self-reported by the vendors, they were the ones who were making the determination of whether or not the sale of a product would be classified as green, right? So RPN identified quite a bit of potential greenwashing. Next slide. So they got through all the data. They did a great job. It was really difficult to get through all of it. And they did identify some baseline levels of green spend, right? So this chart kind of just summarizes that generally across those three categories. There's a couple things that always really stood out to me. You'll see in office supplies, our lowest vendor in terms of green spend, we found only 1.6% of spend that they reported could be classified as green, but then our highest vendor was reported at 43.4%. That's a huge disparity whenever you think about in that market, they're selling really kind of the same products and goods and services. And so that shows us that there's really some level of over-reporting or some level of under-reporting. Similar to facilities MRO, right? That's a giant gap there between those two as well. So we worked hard. We kind of worked together. We determined some of those goals you'll see. So we wanted to move in 2020 up to 50% in office supplies and 25% in janitorial. Those are some really aggressive goals. And what we were going to do is present those goals to that Greening Government Leadership Council to formalize them. Go to the next slide. But then as we kind of further discussed these before we were going to take them to the Greening Government Leadership Council, we started to have some concerns. One, they were obviously pretty aggressive. But two, we were just concerned generally with using spend as a metric for success when it comes to green purchasing, right? Sustainable purchasing efforts. So even if you're buying more green products, that doesn't mean you're making a more positive environmental impact, right? You've got shipping costs, you've got fuel impact, that sort of thing. So buying more, even if it's green, sometimes is actually worse for the environment. We always are going to have a big issue with unreliable data. It's going to take a whole lot of effort to try to analyze all that data. We were going to have to do similar, maybe consultant engagements every year to do this spent analysis. And kind of really selfishly, our office doesn't have any control over the actual spend. Remember that hybrid decentralized model that we have in Colorado, where we set policy, but the agencies are the ones actually spending. So we didn't want to impose a goal on ourselves that we couldn't meet. So for 2018, you can go to the next slide, Kevin. We decided to pivot to product availability. That's what we have control over in our office. What do we make available under our state price agreements? So we wanted to pivot to product availability, training and marketing. We wanted to increase the number of green products that we make available under price agreement. We wanted to provide training and on just the different products that are available and the benefits of those green products. I think anybody who is trying to increase levels of sustainability in their state, they always hear, well, this green product, it just doesn't work as well. And we kind of wanted to help dispel some of those myths and increase marketing efforts around the green products that we have available. And we're going to kind of put that effort onto our vendors' hands. So next slide. So in 2018, we brought RPN and again, Responsible Purchasing Network, and hopefully some of you are familiar with the work that they've done. I know other states have engaged with them to a lot of success, just like we have in Colorado. So we brought them in. We had them identify, the green goods that we make available under those price agreements, and then we had them benchmark against other contracts that we could use here in Colorado, including NASPO Value Point. So there's a little plug for the other side of NASPO, Value Point side. This was just as equally big of an effort this year, even though it didn't include the same deep level data analysis of our spend data. Instead, what they were doing is looking a whole lot at what our vendors are providing out there, looking at vendor websites, stuff like that. They helped, again, confirm whether or not vendors were actually being truthful in classifications of a product as green. And they even took an extra step that we didn't really talk about, and they helped kind of rate vendors' websites on their ease of use and customer friendliness, that sort of thing. They also provided us with some great new green specifications that we can include in new contracts, gave us some standardized reporting requirements, including kind of a reporting tool that we are going to be using across all of our vendors in those 3 high spend categories. And they helped kind of develop some training and marketing ideas that we can do as well. Next slide. So just kind of to wrap it up, using the green purchasing funds from NASPO have really, really been a lifesaver for us in Colorado. It doesn't sound like these projects have been, super in-depth or super complex like you might hear from some of the other states, but it's really allowed us to do things that we didn't have the resources or the knowledge to do, right? It has allowed us to meet some of the goals and directives that have been set out for us. And, we all know we don't want to disappoint the governor's office, of course, even if it was an election year this year. And really, ultimately, what it's all done is it's helped us set us up to take kind of our next step when it comes to green purchasing. Again, we're not where some of the other states are at, but we're making progress with the help of these funds. So, thank you.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate that. It's interesting to hear of some of the the contractors and other agencies that can help you do that deep dive into the data like you're talking about, maybe for states that don't have those resources, and just the overall very interesting and effective use of the funds. So we really appreciate you, John. So up next we have Julia Wolf. She is the Director of Environmental Purchasing for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the state. And Julia, let me see if I can get you to share. If you accept the control there, you should be able to advance your slides.
Let's see here. It looks like it's not going. I did accept.
Well, okay, for the sake of time, Julia, we'll just go ahead and do what we did.
All right, thank you. So thank you so much, and I really want to thank NASPO for their continued support of sustainable purchasing efforts across the country. I just want to do a shout out really to Kevin for becoming the sustainable purchasing lead at NASPO, and it's very important to have a champion there. So I'm going to talk about a project that actually spanned 2 years of green purchasing technical assistance funds. It's a hot area right now, advancing commercial battery-powered landscape equipment in Massachusetts. Next slide. So I'm going to give a quick background on us. So I work at the Operational Services Division. We set up statewide contracts for goods and services. We have over 100 statewide contracts, and like Colorado, we set up the contracts and our eligible entities use them. We don't have any money that literally goes through us. But we have 18 categories of products, and 1.5 billion spend goes through our contracts each year. Executive agencies in the Commonwealth are required to use statewide contracts, and there are many other eligible entities that can use our contracts, including municipalities, public colleges and universities, some nonprofits, and actually we have a number of other states that use different contracts of ours. So we have a very robust EPP program. We've actually had a program and a dedicated director for about 20 years. We also have a statewide Executive Order 515 establishing an environmental purchasing policy that supports all of our efforts, which is really great to have that executive order. Next slide, please. So why electric? There are so many different benefits to converting over to a battery electric type of landscape product. Zero toxic emissions, less noise, no fuel spillage. I heard that, I think EPA did a study that there are literally millions of gallons of spills of gas every year that just go undocumented. There's no fuel costs, less maintenance, no soil and water pollution, and zero greenhouse gas emissions. So we're super excited about this. A couple of years ago, the technology just was not there, but I can say that it is here, and I'm hoping that it stays. Next slide, please. So after all of our work on this, it was really apparent to me that health and safety issues should really be at the forefront of why we should be pushing for transitioning away from gas-powered equipment to battery-powered equipment. The gas equipment, it's an unregulated area. There are many health and safety issues associated with gas-powered equipment. I'm just going to go through a couple of these because I think they're really important for folks to know. Noise exposure levels exceed OSHA hearing protection standards, sometimes are exceeded 1 to 2 orders of magnitude at the ear of the operator. And this noise impacts hearing, but it also increases stress hormones, which have been documented to contribute to higher blood pressure and heart disease. Vibrations disrupt the blood flow and affect the nervous system, resulting in loss of feeling in hands and more. So many landscape workers do complain that they have lost a lot of feeling in their hands. Air emissions are toxic from gas-powered equipment, and there's carcinogenic pieces to it. VOCs, NOx, carbon monoxide, and also the particulate matter, so PM 2.5, which is the size of particulate matter that comes out in the emissions. And the particles of dust blown have been shown to include mold, bacteria, pesticides, toxic metals, etc. So the EPA stated, and this is in the slide, in 2018 that emissions of smog-producing substances from this equipment were 81% as high as the amount from standard sedans. So that's like striking. Lastly, more than half of the landscape workers out there are actually immigrants. It's a low-paying job, and there are environmental justice issues associated with this population of workers. So Quiet Communities is a group, and I'll talk about that in a second, that we worked with. They do a fantastic job. They're a nonprofit. They do a fantastic job giving a presentation on the health and safety issues associated with gas-powered equipment, going through the research, and they provide an extremely compelling argument to rethink our use of gas-powered equipment. And also, they really offer battery electric as a viable option. Next slide, please. So we were able to receive NASPO Green Technical Assistance Funds over 2 periods, 2 years, so phase 1 and phase 2. And we contracted with Quiet Communities. They are a national nonprofit, and their mission is to help transition landscape maintenance programs to low noise, zero emission practices. And I worked really closely with Jamie Banks, who is the executive director. She's quite a dynamo, and she really knows her stuff. She works nationally and internationally. She's an environmental and healthcare scientist. She's a PhD. And just in November, she actually presented a paper at the on all of this at the American Health Association in San Diego at their annual meeting, and it was very well received. Next slide. So we got together with Quiet Communities, thought about, okay, what really difference can we make in purchasing with this? And we have a contract, FAC 88, Lawns and Grounds, Equipment, Parts, and Services. It has existing contract specs for landscape equipment, including commercial and non-commercial grade. It's a very large contract. And we realized that we really needed to develop some specifications for commercial grade battery-powered landscape equipment. And the mission was to develop specs that made sure battery-powered equipment was comparable in power to the gas counterparts. And this is really important because that's one of the complaints over the past years with this new equipment, is that it's just not powerful enough. So we wanted to make sure that it's really going to be comparable. So these are really the first in-depth commercial grade specs around for battery powered equipment. There are many other commercial specifications out there, I think, with other states, but I don't know if it goes into as much detail as we have. So next slide. So these are the 3 areas we identified in our criteria, and I'm just going to highlight a few of them on this slide. I'm not going to actually go into detail and everything, and you can view a copy of the specs. It's publicly available in our online procurement system, Combis, and it's going to be made available. You can always contact me. I'm happy to send them to you. But I just wanted to point out a few things that were really important. The first being the warranty. We required a 2-year warranty for equipment and batteries because this is a new technology and we wanted to give buyers some additional added security. Then also with the equipment, we wanted to make sure that it was functionally reliable. We wanted proof that the equipment works in heavy workload settings for at least a year, that it's already been working for at least a year and didn't have problems. The whole area of specifications for batteries, this is a very new area. It's changing quickly. There are many advances in battery technology, and it was important to define what commercial grade meant here. And so I just point you to sort of the charge time and the run time. They're really important to have. And lastly, the services and programs. We included a requirement for vendors to provide education and training. There's lots to learn on planning and operating this equipment. And it's very different than your gas counterparts. And if you have good training and good education, it will lead to a successful program. Next slide, please. So we went back to the existing vendors on our contract and we said, hey, you guys, we have these new specs. Can you provide us equipment that we could put on the contract that meets the specs? And unfortunately, all of the recommendations that the existing vendors provided us did not meet the specifications. But we knew that there were other vendors out there that could. So we reopened the contract and we added a new category for environmentally preferable products. We received 6 bids and awarded 4 vendors, which was super exciting. And right here is the list of the vendors. And I just want to point out that any state can purchase from this contract. We just request that you send a request to purchasing agent at mass.gov and adhere to the requirements of the contract. Next slide. So we also knew that it was important, this is really new equipment in the marketplace. And another thing we did with this grant was to develop a tool to help us understand the costs, which are higher upfront for this type of equipment, but show that over time, due to lower maintenance, chemical and fuel costs, the return on investment often pays off in a few years. So we developed a spreadsheet tool, and the tool has 2 components. It compares multi-year costs of equipment with similar specifications and performance characteristics, but it also compares emissions from electric to gas. Next slide. This is a screenshot of the tool. On the left, you plug in the information on electric equipment, and on the right for gas, the gas counterparts. And then it spits out estimated reductions in annual carbon dioxide emissions, estimates per year cost and cumulative cost, and estimated amortized cost over the warranty period. And this is really important buyer information that buyers need to really take a look and compare these two. The tool has not been reviewed, peer reviewed yet, and we welcome any feedback. And I just want to point out that all calculations are transparent and criteria can be changed depending on what you need. So all of the tabs are open and everything can sort of be changed in this tool. Next slide. So phase 2 consisted of training and technical assistance. We ended up doing 2 unbranded trainings in September. We had over 100 participants, brought together technical experts, buyers, vendors, and explored a lot of the issues that I've already talked about. We gave a lot of facts and resources for informed buying decisions. And really one of the most important things was having these product demonstrations. So all the vendors brought their equipment so that buyers could come and feel and touch and use and really see that this equipment was viable. And right now we're just finishing up a short movie on the trainings that we'll share with those interested and post a link on our website. It's sort of a marketing little movie. I had folks come up to me during the product demonstration and just say, oh my gosh, I just can't believe I didn't know that we were so far along. I mean, the equipment is really extraordinary. Next slide. And then the last piece is the technical assistance piece. We were able to provide a number of entities some technical assistance. The town of Lexington, they have actually, after our training, made a commitment to transition to a battery powered town-wide program. So they've actually put it in their budget. So that's very exciting. And the town of Lexington, they're actually exploring becoming a certified green zone through the American Green Zone Alliance, or AGZA. And I just want to give a shout out to this organization who's been on the forefront of developing a third-party equipment certification program. And they're going to have an online training certification as well. So just to support this third party, I think is super important in this area. We've also been working with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, including Walden Pond. It's going to transition over to a program and potentially becoming a green zone. And we've been meeting with some of the airports and through the Department of Transportation, Mass Aeronautics. They've committed funding also to purchase equipment for 6 of the airports. So it's just beginning to happen. Next slide, please. Our final report, I just finalized it, the draft this morning, and we have to send it up for review, but once it's done, hopefully by next week, I'll be sending it over to NASPO to post. We'll also be posting it on our website. Next slide. And just to sum up, this was a super exciting project, and I'm so excited to keep working on this as well. There are so many environmental, health and safety, and cost reducing benefits. And with advances in battery power, we're seeing major manufacturers committing and getting into this new market. So it's an industry that's really moving fast. So I hope that what we've done will be helpful for others in leveling the playing field and defining what commercial grade really means here. Next slide. So that actually concludes my presentation, and here's contact information if anybody would like to contact me. Thank you.
Julia, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Truly one of the more interesting projects that I was ever able to be a part of. I've talked to Julia a couple different times about this project, and it's just something really special that you guys are doing. So, and to mirror what Julia was saying, I also have everyone's contact information after this. If you want to get a hold of somebody, if you have more questions, you can let me know, and I'm happy to pass that information along. So next we have Melissa Peck. She's the Sustainable Procurement Program Coordinator with the state of Minnesota. And Melissa, we'll just keep doing what we're doing because apparently the shared controls aren't working.
Sounds good. All right, so what we did with our NASPO Green Purchasing Technical Assistance Funds was to host a workshop to assist our targeted group vendors in being competitive on contracts that we have that have sustainability requirements on them. So if you want to go to the next slide. Great. just for some context, as far as what our program is, we've had a program for a long time. It was mainly environmentally preferable purchasing for a really long time. That started in the late 90s and was focused on recycled content. So that was largely only the environmental component of sustainability. And that was through a partnership between our Department of Administration's Office of State Procurement and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which are two different agencies at our state level. And that program for a long time was pretty unstructured and informal. And the mindset at the time was that these three components, these three interests were all important, but they were mutually exclusive and we'd choose one over another. So that's why we kind of just focused on recycled content, I think. But today it looks much more like the diagram on the right, where it's much more advanced in its structure and ideology. We view it much more holistically, and that's contributed a lot to our program's acceptance and success. The program has also been solidified in executive order goals and policies, and really the development of our program, the way it is in its current form over the past few years, coincided with our connection with the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, which is who we collaborated with on this workshop. So if any of you guys are unfamiliar with them, they're an organization working to increase sustainability in supply chains. We use their guidance in our program, and we use it to develop our purchasing policy. And then we also use it to develop this workshop. So I'll give you a link for that information at the end. But I think we can move on to the next slide. Great. So our program's kind of holistic, sustainability-focused, intertwined philosophy means that we also have to focus on that component of social sustainability, right? So the state of Minnesota's sustainability policies and goals that we have laid out in those executive orders include goals for targeted group spend with businesses that are owned by women, minorities and veterans, people with disabilities, and businesses located in what we call economically disadvantaged areas. So specifically our goals around that are that we want to get an 8% spend with certified targeted vendors and 12% spend with women, minority, economically disadvantaged, or veteran-owned businesses. So next slide. And as you can see by these graphs, we've had a bit of success in that area on these goals since fiscal year 16, but we do have quite a bit of work to do. Next slide. And to work towards these goals, you know, increasing that diverse spend that we saw on the last slide, while still trying to require the sustainability components in our contracts, we held this targeted group, economically disadvantaged, veteran-owned workshop. We shortened that to TGEDVO. I might do that to the rest. That's a mouthful. And there were three general goals of the workshop that we held overall, and that was to level the playing field for all vendors, to provide some practical, useful tips on how to be competitive when bidding on contracts that have sustainability requirements built in, and to really listen and learn from vendor feedback and try to gauge what some of the barriers and challenges might be that they are facing. And again, we just really wanted to try to assist these vendors in maximizing their competitiveness when they're addressing these requirements. So next slide. So what we did was we held a big workshop. It was a full-day workshop. One half was a general session, and the second half were breakout sessions. The general session was geared to raise awareness with targeted vendors about our sustainability goals and expectations, to orient them to sustainability performance requirements that might be included or that are included, to prepare them to compete on contracts with environmental requirements, and to direct them to existing resources that might be useful. We also talked about some specific common barriers that seem to come up, at least that we perceived as common barriers, and I'll show some slides for that next. As far as the breakout session, that we had two categories for. We did a spend analysis a number of years back in 2013, and we found that, excuse me, IT and Cleaning and janitorial services were pretty high in our impact categories, so those are priorities for us right now. So those are the two categories we focused on for our breakout sessions. And the breakout sessions were facilitated by our staff, by staff from the SPLC as well, and they were intended to identify where these targeted vendors do and do not currently meet existing sustainability requirements and preferences. And really, it was much more of a targeted conversation on what was working well and then what their perceived challenges were. So next slide. All right, so these are the examples that we gave during the general session. Our first perceived common barrier is product specifications and the complexity that can sometimes come with those. So the example we have here is for a cleaner, and we commonly see this in cleaners where there's this incredibly complex, scientifically worded specification. So here we're talking about toxicity, specifically LD50s and LC50s. And if you're not a scientist, this can be kind of intimidating. So we just kind of try to tackle this. And on the next slide, we have some common questions. So if you want to switch to the next slide. So what we thought were some common questions raised about product specifications and potential concerns around that are like, what does this specification even mean? Does my product meet it? What do I do if I need more time to research whether my product or service meets the requirements here? And if I think this specification seems unduly restrictive, how do I provide a suggestion for improvement? So we walked them through some potential solutions for that and provided a tip sheet to help them answer questions such as this one. So next slide. The second barrier that we gave as an example were eco-label standards and certifications. So there are a lot of eco-labels out there right now, and at the time of the workshop, which was early this year, I'm sure there are more now, but at that point in time, there were about 460, I believe. And we thought that vendors with limited experience dealing with eco-labels and standards and certifications such as this might have some questions. So next slide. Some of the questions we thought they might have are, how do they get the certification? How much does it cost? How much time does it take? And are they required? So again, we tried to address some of these on our tip sheet, but we also talked through some solutions to questions and concerns that might be raised around this. Next slide. Our last barrier example is reporting. On this slide, we have the reporting requirements for our lamp specification, and this requirement is something that's pretty typical for us. This is the information that we need that allows us to understand the environmental impacts of the requirements that we're including on our contract. And all vendors were told on the lamps contract that they would need to provide this level of detail to a customer upon request, and it would have to be in the format on the next slide, which I'll show you in a second. And vendors are asked to provide this information for all of the products that they sell under the contract on an annual basis. Next slide. So this is the spreadsheet that we send them to include reporting in. This has actually been updated this year, and it includes even more columns. As you can tell, it's pretty in-depth. Next slide. So some of the frequently asked questions on reporting are, what does the state do with this information? What if I don't have all the information requested? And what do I do if I don't have enough time or resources to complete this required reporting? So we tried to address these the best we can, but as a side note, reporting is a bit of a challenge for us as well. And this coming year, we are looking to request NASPO green funds to procure an IT solution that would mitigate some of the reporting issues using some sort of IT automated solution or a portal. And we're hoping that might lighten the load both for vendors when they're trying to report back to us and us when we're trying to pull that reporting and do some fiscal year reporting for our program. So it looks like we are on the outcomes and benefits slide. So what came of our workshop? Well, as you can see on the slide, we submitted it as a case study to the SPLC Case Study Awards, and we did receive a Case Study Award on this project. Nearly 100 people registered for the event, about 62 ultimately attended. The workshop evaluations and follow-up emails and then conversations with attendees all indicated that the workshop was pretty well received for the most part. Not for the most part, it really actually was extremely well received. So with that said, overall, our outcomes were kind of hard to measure. The workshop was really intended to be practical. So if what we were focusing on had any kind of take with the vendors, the outcome would be increased participation in the bidding process and increased competition. So these are both really beneficial to end users, and it would also eliminate mistakes and confusion. And while we don't have affirmative proof that these goals were achieved, we again think that if the information and guidance we provided were taken in, we should be receiving the outcomes that we were looking for. But anecdotally, the first immediate benefit that we derived occurred before the workshop even happened. So our group decided that in order to get the right people at the breakout sessions that we had to make calls to specific businesses to get them to participate. So that contact allowed us to learn a lot of pertinent information, and it allowed for the beginning of development of personal relationships with those vendors as well. We were also able to gather feedback from the vendors, having those one-on-one conversations, so that was great. And additionally, another benefit that we got through this workshop that was kind of tangential was that our team developed new partnerships with other state agencies that are working on similar things. So the Office of Equity and Procurement and our procurement team assistance group. And those relationships are going to allow us to really advance our sustainability-related supplier development work more quickly, I think, and hopefully more effectively. So next question, or next slide, excuse me. As I mentioned, the post-workshop reaction and feedback forms were overwhelmingly positive. As you'll see on this slide, I put some of the quotes on here, and really the narrative was that vendors felt heard, they felt engaged, and they felt that it was informative. So that was really what we were trying to get at. We also received some follow-up emails and conversations that indicated a major takeaway for attendees was that the state really seemed committed to supporting these vendors, which is really, really great as well. Next slide. As far as next steps, I mentioned that our building of relationships with the Office of Equity and Procurement was one of the benefits of the workshop. So we're working together with them to generate some ideas for future sustainability-related supplier development activities, and some of these are already in process. Next slide. I also mentioned SPLC earlier in the presentation. So if you are interested in doing a supplier development workshop such as this, we used the Sustainable Supplier Development Workshop Toolkit that is provided by SPLC, and using the link at the bottom of this page, you'll be taken to the web page that you see on this slide, and you can request it. The toolkit is available to non-members currently, but if you're interested in membership, you can also find out more about that on their webpage. Next slide. With that, we found the workshop to be incredibly helpful and informative. We got some really great feedback, and we think that it really gave us an opportunity to connect with some of our targeted vendors and provide them with the information that we really want them to have. So we want to thank NASPO for the opportunity to do this workshop in the first place with the green purchasing funds. Yeah, so it doesn't look like there are any questions, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Melissa. That was excellent. And SPLC truly does have some great resources. I encourage you to go check them out online as well. And it seems like you got some really good feedback from that training. So again, great work. Thank you very much. Last but certainly not least, we have Amy Farnham and she is with the state of New Hampshire. She's a program specialist, and Amy, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin, and nice to meet everybody virtually. So my program is entitled R4. That's kind of a new branding that refers to reducing, reusing, recycling, and reclaiming through green purchasing, hence the R4. And there'll be a little graphic and a couple slides here for that. But my program's embedded in the Administrative Services Department of the state of New Hampshire. And then I actually fall under the Division of Procurement and Support Services. So all the programs work very closely with the purchasing department. And I would just like to restate the appreciation that everybody shared for NASPO and their support of EPP. So our use of the funds was for a pilot of baling, and we focused on cardboard and office paper. There'll be more information about that on further slides as well. But basically, I have a dedicated recycling fund that is a revenue model. So my costs must be less than my revenue, and my goal is to create revenue opportunities. However, since our law, which will be on the next slide, was enacted in 2008, we have focused on expenses in the form of single stream recycling collection. So the idea of this pilot was to see what was involved in implementing baling. And I have a note down the bottom that our startup costs were very strongly supported by the Green Fund. Next slide. And some words up front that there's a lot of wordy slides. It's supplemental information to review the slide deck later. So I've just given a link here to the law in question, and it does explicitly refer to those sort of R4s. Next slide. So this is an overview of the project as a whole, restating where I sit in the state government and what the project is. The highlighted words there are actually what's going to have more detail in future slides, what the focus will be. But the important one is going to be how the pilot unfolded, but also the why. So here in New England, it's not actually mentioned here, but another environmentally minded thought is that we have landfill capacity issues in New England. So we want to make sure that we are reclaiming as much material as we can for recycling and reuse. But for the purposes of the pilot and the R4 Recycling Fund, I focused on taking out some of the material that we were paying to have collected and then baling it so that we could sell it in the market. So next slide. So cardboard and office paper falls into what's known as the fiber market. And there's some terminology here about how they label cardboard and office paper for sale in the market. So OCC and SOP, and then there's pictures of what that material looks like. And then off to the right, you can see two of my recent bales. I wish that I had given a picture of what my first SOP bale looked like because it was not nice and neat and tidy like that one on the bottom left. Next slide. So here's the where. We're talking about a radius or a straight path almost of about 2 miles. So there's 2 sites in question, and collectively they have about 15 buildings of office material. And there's 2 separate collection programs there. So we have internal state staff that go around and collect from the offices. This is the only place that this happens in the entire state. Everybody else just walks out to the dumpster outside and sends the single stream. But these 2 have more hands-on, so this is why these were targeted. They also have a significant volume of material. So instead of the drivers, collectors going to the single stream container, we just sent them to our state surplus, which is called White Farm, down in the bottom left there. Next slide. Next slide. So a little bit of background. The recycling industry is in an upheaval right now, if folks have not heard. This is just an overview of single stream if you're not familiar with the system, and there's a link there to where this definition came from. But basically everything goes into one container. And at the curbside, it's not as significant for contamination because A, you can see into the smaller containers, and B, there's a tendency to sort a little bit better. But at the state level, for entire agency buildings or entire division buildings, whatever the case may be, we're talking about large roll-off dumpsters of between 2 and 10 yards. Most of ours are actually between 8 and 10 yards. So the opportunity for contamination increases significantly. And that is important to this baling pilot because of the need to help clean up this market-driven industry. Next slide. So getting at the idea of contamination and putting things into the dumpsters that don't belong there is this concept of wish cycling. And again, this is a supplemental slide, so you can go and read more if you want. And also a shout out to the great work that Massachusetts DEP did in creating a search tool for folks to look through what is trash and what is recycling. And that can be used in general across New England because we have the same vendors for the most part, the same recycling systems and whatnot. So I actually share this with my stakeholders. So thank you to Massachusetts for that. But what happens is that materials go into those big agency dumpsters that should not be in there. And that influences our contracting and also relevant to this pilot, my sorting of material at White Farm. There's an image there of packaged newspapers. So mixed material is not recycling. If something that can be recycled, like a newspaper or magazine, is in shrink wrap or other material that's not of the same nature, it's not recycling, it's trash unless you separate them. And so there's this issue of folks not knowing what is trash and what's recycling. And by doing this pilot, I was actually able to dive into the material that's going into these test sites and to extrapolate what might be happening across the rest of the state for outreach and education purposes. Next slide. Here's a video for a tour of a material recovery facility. If no one has ever been to one or seen such video, it really shows what happens when people wish cycle and put things in there, because a lot of it is hand sorted or specialized machinery sorting, and wish cycling really interrupts the whole system. Next slide. All right, so on to the nitty-gritty of the project. So step one was a feasibility study to find out even if I could get permission, approval from leadership to undergo this idea. So in the first section there, the startup needs, I did the best that I could to determine what I would need for space and staff and equipment and supplies. My list was way off by the end of the pilot, by the way. I was operating in a large vast of unknown because this has never been done before in our state, and I couldn't really find comparable systems to align it with. So I just jumped into it without a lot of information up front. And also the same for the material flow and also the market value. Those highlighted aspects, I did have information I could draw from. I used the EPA's conversion chart for recyclables to calculate the estimated material flow based upon observations I did going out to the test sites and tracking the frequency of collection of the containers. And then from that, I did a cost-benefit analysis and a return on investment for leadership. And that actually gained approval with the search for funding and how we were going to fund the project, and hence the technical assistance funds from NASPO Green that that I was able to fund almost 50% of startup with the grant. So it was a go. However, the staff aspect of it was me, because I was the one that needed to collect the data that would be needed to go forward. And I virtually did not have any insight into how long it would take to sort and make a bale, because it's so dependent upon what the material is coming in. And I didn't know what that mixed stream of paper and cardboard would be like. So the return on investment and the cost benefit analysis that I gave to leadership also evolved greatly throughout the 4 months that the pilot was going on. Next slide. There's quite a few numbers here, but basically this just represents my process for trying to calculate the volume of material that we would be looking at. And then this is the synthesis of 2 years worth of market data for the pricing of OCC and SOP that you're looking at on the right-hand side. And to reiterate again, it was very difficult to estimate this with any security that it would be accurate. And I just finished redoing the final cost-benefit outcomes and ROI outcomes, but I didn't include it. I didn't include all of it in the presentation. There is one bit of it at the end. But if anybody's interested in seeing the entire Excel sheet, my contact information will be at the end. Next slide. I just wanted to blow up the market analysis a little bigger to show the totals averages on the bottom. Whenever you're engaging in any sort of revenue activity such as this, it's very important to forecast constantly. I'm going to redo this market analysis to be the last 2 years as of November, and then also projected out to what the values look like over 3 years. Because this market is especially volatile. When I did this last fall, the low for the OCC is showing as $96 per ton. These are per ton values is how the material is sold. However, the current low is right now 70 and has held it about that for the last 6 months. And then the high for SOP was shown as 132 over the last 2 years prior to startup. But it's actually at 210 right now. So you can see there's a lot of variability in the pricing of the material of the bales. Next slide. So in the contract specifications, explain what we need from the vendors to show their pricing. So the bottom image there is the November pricing from our vendor. They send us this each month at the start of the month as part of the specifications for the contract. There's several descriptions here because we have a choice in the specifications of how we want to sell. So the pricing varies per ton, which is about 2 bales if you're interested, by how we sell it. So we get much more if we sell mill direct than sending it down to the vendor for them to add with other bales and process up to the mill. And then I compare this to our pricing. There's actually 2 indices that I use. One is regional, which is a member organization, NRRA, that we're associated with, and they put this sheet out each month. This is actually just an example from August, so that's why these prices don't necessarily match up, although they sort of do, even though it was a few months ago. I accidentally pulled the wrong index, but I look at this first, and then I compare this regional index to what the national index looks like as a cross-check for everything. Next slide. So the second step after approval was to prepare. So we had to source a baler and then get the site ready. I could not find a site that was suitable for space and association with the other state agencies or a rental situation that had three-phase electric. And we did have a baler already that had been purchased and never used by the recycling fund, so it was my equipment. So we had to install electric. So we went to contract for an upgrade, and that whole process lasted about 2.5 months, from the time we started the specs to the time that the upgrade project was finished. Next slide. So step 3 in getting the room ready was to secure the staff, supplies, and storage. As I said, I was the staff. I still am the staff to a large degree. But these are examples of some of the things that I needed. So we got some plastic shipping containers to hold the flat paper. We got some cardboard Gaylord containers to hold shredding and cardboard, the lighter materials. That's a pallet jack with a scale so that we can keep track of how much each bale weighs for comparison to the invoice from the vendor. And then there's an image there of the whole room and what it looks like right now. I installed the pallet racking that you see there. We had the overhead door installed as a fire marshal request. And then the bottom image on the right is the vendor trailer that's currently on site. So we just truck those bales up in there and stack them. And then when the trailer is full, the vendor will pull up and swap out the trailers for us. The first round in the pilot, we actually had our own trailer. And we had to unload 44 bales and reload them when the vendor trailer came, which was not efficient. So we've gone to this model, which is actually added expense because we have to rent the trailer from the vendor. So it's not ideal. They will not charge us if we can get capacity up to 1 trailer a month. So that is phase 2 to get more raw material. Next slide. And step 4, implementation. There's a set of questions here that I had to ask myself. And as it says down below, and I've said a couple times now, it was evolution. So this is one of the SOP bales in the baler. So I didn't know how much cardboard versus SOP we would have, but we only had 1 baler, so we can only put 1 type of material in there at a time, so that influences the flow of the product and what we have to store and stockpile in relation to producing. So these are some considerations to be had in thinking through such a pilot. Next step, next slide. This is a video, but I don't know if it's going to play. I'm going to say it. Oh, there we go. So here's a bale being ejected, if anybody wants to see what that process is like. It's going way slower than it actually happens in real life. Next slide. And the purpose of me doing the baling myself, other than the fact that staff wasn't part of the CBA, is so that I could collect data of all those unknowns that I didn't have. So I had dry erase boards up that I would take a photo of every day in case it got smudged. But on the bottom left is the full image of them on the side of the baler, and then on the right are the two individual. So I'm keeping track of each material. I'm noting the date, the weight, the number of bale out, and then we have a labeling system where we actually write on the bale itself. And then on the top right is the number of containers that I'm getting per day. And this is kind of complex and beyond this presentation, but I have 2 different types of material and 3 different types at the same time because the SOP comes in shredding and it also comes in flat paper. So I have to keep track of the different type of bins so that I know how much material we have on hand to make each bale. Next slide. This is our first load sold. So for our trailer minus the fee for them to come and collect it. So we have to pay a rental on the trailer and we have to pay for the transportation because we had decided for this load not to go mill direct. So we would not pay that $350 if we simply waited for the mill to send a truck. But we take on a lot of risk by doing that because if there's any contamination in the load, they'll turn the trailer back and then you take that risk, whereas the vendor is taking this risk for us in sending it directly to them. So you can see that the first load was almost 40,000 pounds and we had 44 bales, and the SOP was greater than the OCC, which is our trend. It looks like that is the trend for this two group of material that we're or these two sites that we're bringing in, that is consistent. Next slide. And again, lots of numbers, but this is the final overview of what our startup costs were. The top three are what the technical assistance funds supported, less the fact that I just bought a high cube shipping container to be our storage unit instead of the trailer. That didn't work. So we sold the original storage trailer in our fall auction and put that money back, reinvested that money into buying the shipping container. Next slide. And here's my contact information. I see there's one question down below, but if you are interested in hearing any more or any other background materials like the contract or the full CBA and ROI, just reach out. And I don't know if everybody could see the question because it says private chat. But it looks like Julia asked if the material that I'm collecting would have gone to landfill, and if we avoided, did you include avoided disposal costs? So in New Hampshire for our recycling collection contract, we actually don't have any disposal costs. It's merely pickup, which I hear is unusual, but for some reason it seems we got that good deal. So all I pay is a haul fee. But as far as the material going to landfill, it's not something that the vendor would tell us, but industry indication news articles are that a large volume of the material in single stream is currently going to landfill. So we did, by taking back control, take less of that risk that this particular material, this 40,000 pounds, would go to our regional landfill. Thank you, Kevin.
Amy, thank you so much. It's truly one of the more unique ones. I've had a couple conversations with Amy, and it's one of the more unique ones. One of the more out there in terms of what we usually do with the funds, but just so unique, and it was really great to hear from you. So thank you very much. Thank you to everybody that has stayed on. I know we're just a little bit over our time, but I really appreciate it. I wanted to quickly thank all of our panelists today for presenting, and of course I want to thank all the states who submitted applications and utilized the funds this year. I really want to thank you guys, the attendees, for joining us today, and your continued efforts in learning about sustainability and practicing some of these different outlets that we have. They're really unique. I am recording this webinar, so it's going to be available on the NASPO network as well as on YouTube within 24 hours of this. I also would encourage you to take a look on our website. That's naspo.org. If you do that, you go down to publications, you go to our green purchasing resources. We have a green purchasing guide. And that has information surrounding the adoption of a green purchasing program. It's an easy to use document that provides purchasers with a basic understanding of concepts and benefits of green purchasing. It's got recommended steps and proven strategies that'll help enable the implementation of a green purchasing program. It's also got links to other resources that offers detailed information on specific elements. Again, if you would like the slide deck to this presentation or the contact information of any of our panelists, you can email me at kminor, that's K-M-I-N-O-R, @naspo.org. I'm happy to send you the recording of this webinar, slide deck, or any other information I can help you with. Before we go, does anybody have any questions for our panelists? Okay, seeing none, I'll go ahead and wrap this up. And again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today.